When we think about impact, it's often the ripple effect of one person shifting the way an entire system can work. And that's exactly what today's guest has done. Dr. Abbie Miller has spent years on the front lines as a practicing physician where she has seen firsthand the cracks in our health system. Lack of access, missed opportunities for prevention, and unsafe transitions into care. But instead of just accepting the way that things are, Abbie has decided to step into leadership and areas where she can use her skills to really drive meaningful change for groups of populations that are close to her heart and organizations that are close to her heart. Abbie has proven what's possible when medical expertise meets vision. She also lends her voice to critical causes, like serving on the board for Children's Cancer Research Fund, a national nonprofit based in the Twin Cities. Abbie is a person inspiring the next generation of leaders in healthcare, and I can't wait for you to meet her.
You're listening to Act to Impact with Brandy DeVries. Through heartfelt stories of resilience, hope, and community, I share my personal experience as a longtime advocate and fundraiser for the national nonprofit Children's Cancer Research Fund. Invite pediatric cancer families to tell their stories and highlight individuals who use their unique gifts to create a positive impact.
Welcome to Act to Impact. I want to thank all of the listeners and viewers for taking the time for listening and sharing Act to Impact. This podcast has been such a bright light in my life this last year as it's allowed me to share people's inspiring stories and igniting action in people for ways that they can make an impact in their daily lives and in their communities. So, if you, though, could the time, take a moment to subscribe, set up Act to Impact as an automatic download in Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or just even simply leave a comment for me, that would help me to be able to reach more people. And I'd be beyond grateful. So now let's take action. I'm very excited to introduce today's guest, Abbie, to Act to Impact. So, Abbie, welcome to Act to Impact.
Thank you, Brandy. It's great to be here.
And we have known each other for quite a while now, years maybe, when SOAR Leadership Council was originally founded. I think you were one of the first people that I shared that I was going to be starting Act to Impact with because of our relationship with SOAR Leadership Council and CCRF and the events that we're involved in. And even though SOAR Leadership Council is not where we are both at anymore because that has evolved, and we're going to hear about the ways that your role has evolved with Children's Cancer Research Fund, we're both very active with CCRF as well.
Yeah,
still.
Indeed. Absolutely. Yeah. I remember when you told me that you were going to be starting the podcast. I was so excited for you.
Yeah, like you and some of the other CCRF team members were the first people I wanted to share it with because I know you guys would have some expertise, but also you guys would be great cheerleaders for me, which you all have been, and supportive of my mission with us. So, but yeah, we have had a number of good years with CCRF and lending our skills and resources to that organization. And we've served on the Dream Gala together. And we're also team members of the Great Cycle Challenge, which we are just finishing up with that. Hey, remind me, how many miles did you bike this year and how much money did you raise?
So I pledged to bike 300 miles. I think all said and done, I did about 303 miles this year. And my goal was to raise $1,500, and I got about $1,585 all said and done. So I'm very happy. Again, hit those goals, got those miles in, right up until I think my last ride was on the 28th of September. And that was actually, I did a century ride to finish the month. So that was 100 miles in a day, which is, as I said, it's hard work, but you know what? We do hard things for the cause to fight children's cancer.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this year, like, I mean, I'm so in awe of people like you who are able to bike 300 miles in a month or more. I mean, some people are biking like 700, which blows my mind because as you know, I got Bane involved this year. And as a 6-year-old, I was like, all right, what's your goal going to be for, your miles? And he said 50 miles. And so we broke it down on how many miles about he'd have to bike a day. And then I would show him, though, what people like you were doing on our team and how many miles you guys were biking. And he'd be like, "What? They biked 100 miles in one day?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's really cool." But our Team Created to Conquer, did so well this year. I
Oh,
mean, we raised like what, over $20,000 as a team. And we had, I think, 4, 5 kids
yeah.
on our team.
Awesome.
So it was really, yeah, it was a good year for us this year. It was really fun. I can't wait to keep that going and see what our team can do next year.
Well, and we had a really fun group ride as well. There were quite a few people there. And so, yeah, I always enjoy the group rides because I like seeing the other people within our team. So it was a lot of fun.
Yep, I know. All of us in our orange and blue jerseys from either
Yeah.
this year or the year before, or the people that have done amazing jobs raising $2,500 or more get those awesome superhero jerseys.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really fun. So, all right. So, before we get into why Children's Cancer Research Fund is a mission that you're supporting and what your personal connection is to that, I want to first get the audience to know you a little bit better. We've alluded to a couple different things, but I want you to share a proud moment that you maybe had recently or a fun fact so that the audience can get a feel for your personality.
All right. So I will say both a fun fact and a proud moment. Bicycling for me was not I got into it, probably started in about 2020, and it was, I think, a lot of people sort of recognized in 2020 when, we really didn't have all the social outlets that we used to have, and a lot of us were sort of stuck at home. I felt like a lot of us had to develop hobbies, right? And I was never a sourdough person. I didn't get into that. I didn't, go around and clean out all my closets, but I did get into bicycling. And we've got some really good friends of ours who are avid cyclists. So I borrowed a bike from my best friend and started riding and really kind of, caught the bug, so to speak. And so I started cycling then. And that's really, I've been kind of each year given myself a new goal. So last year I completed a century ride for the first time. And earlier this year, again with those friends, my husband and I did a bicycle vacation with Trek. The bicycle company Trek has a touring arm, and they have all these different tours around the country and around the world. And we did a 5-day trip in the Cascade Mountains where I rode about 800 miles, or excuse me, I rode about 200 miles and climbed about 8,500 feet in 5 days. So I will say, that was hard work. I'm very proud of what I did. It was actually a lot of fun. And surprisingly, I would do it again.
That's awesome. And I guess I learned something new about you too. I didn't realize that you just got into cycling when not that long ago. I just assumed you've been doing it forever.
Nope, just 5 years, just 5 years. So yeah, but
Good.
again, it's one of those, just you set a new goal for yourself each day. And so like I remember the first time I did, 20 miles in a day, and then going up from there, the 30 miles in a day, 40, so on and so forth. So yes,
Mhm.
gotta everybody start somewhere. I think one of the key things is making sure you have the right equipment. I have a bicycle that's really lightweight, and so it makes it a little bit easier to go for those distances.
My bike would not allow me to do that. Like some days on my 7 or 9 mile rides, I'm like, I don't know. I think this bike might be working against me instead of for me. There is something to be said about that. So, yes, let's get into the heart of the podcast now. I know your story. I've heard it several times over the years, but can you share with the audience why you support the mission of Children's Cancer Research Fund and why it's personal to you and how that led you to get involved with CCRF?
Yeah, absolutely. So exactly like you said, it's very personal to our family. So my stepson Kyle in 2005 was diagnosed with stage 4 neuroblastoma. He was 5 years old at the time. We went through treatment here in the Twin Cities. He was treated at Minneapolis Children's Hospital. He had a wonderful oncology team. He had what's called an autologous stem cell transplant. And that's basically where they take your own bone marrow and they take it out of your body. They essentially kill off your entire bone marrow and then they reinfuse your bone marrow back. And sort of the reason for that is because the thought is that, with the cancer in the bone marrow, if they can get rid of the cancerous bone marrow and put good, clean bone marrow back, then you'll go into remission and maybe be cancer free. And he did go into remission. He was in remission for about a year, but then unfortunately the cancer came back. At which point we traveled for a few other treatments to some other, oncology centers in other states. But ultimately, in 2009, in the spring, his oncology team gathered us together and said that there were no more treatments available for Kyle. So Kyle went on hospice and passed away in October of 2009. So that has made the whole sort of journey, everything that we've gone through as a family, losing a child to cancer, we don't want other families to have to go through that. We heard about Children's Cancer Research Fund when Kyle was going through treatment, but again, like many cancer families, we were single-mindedly focused on Kyle and getting through treatment, helping take care of his sister Kiana. So we really, again, it was just too close. We didn't have sort of the emotional energy at the time. When after Kyle passed away, it took a couple years as well for us to really feel again like we had the emotional energy to, be then part of CCRF. And so we started to become involved. We attended the gala for the first time, my husband and I. And shortly thereafter, somebody from CCRF reached out about joining SOAR Leadership Council. And so kind of from there, the rest is history. We've been involved ever since.
And it, like, really snowballed. I mean, you really got into it. Well, it's because you weren't on the SOAR leadership board very long because
Yeah.
they were like, "Abbie knows medicine. She might be able to have her skills shared in a more formal, larger capacity," which I don't know necessarily how that conversation went. So maybe
Yeah.
you can even shed some light on how you got on involved with the CCRF. We called it the big board at the time, like, Core Leadership Council was the little board, and then we always referred to them the real board as, like, the big board. But, yeah, one day we went to a SOAR Leadership Council meeting, and they're like, "Okay, Abbie has now moved to the big board." And you were a liaison, though, for a while between SOAR and the board, so because we were trying to bring some cohesiveness and what we're doing, we wanted to be able to support the board as SOAR Leadership Council.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great story. Again, exactly. So when you and I were on the SOAR Leadership Council and the idea of the SOAR Leadership Council was really to get people who were sort of emerging in their careers that wanted to do more things with nonprofits, kind of dip a toe, so to speak, into, nonprofit board service. And it was a great sort of stepping stone, I think. People like were introduced to CCRF and now, continue to be involved. There are several others with us that continue to still be involved even to this day. And so it just was a really great thing. I'm a family medicine physician. And as a family medicine physician, I worked as a hospitalist. I had, some general, obviously, knowledge of medicine, and kind of more interest in cancer research, cancer treatment, because of everything that had gone on in my family with Kyle. And so, because of that, when I was sort of stepping part-time away from SOAR, I continued to, keep conversation lines open with the leadership at CCRF. And the opportunity came, the CEO of CCRF at the time, he reached out to me to let me know that they were starting up a research advisory committee and that, this research advisory committee was going to be researchers from the University of Minnesota then also other premier cancer research institutes as well around the country. And he said that as he was thinking of people to be on the research advisory committee, he thought that, he thought of me, which was great because, everyone else on the research advisory committee, they all are like amazing experts in the field of oncology and in cancer research. And I'm a family medicine doctor. So, I mean, so I'm definitely not an expert. They speak at levels, up here, and I can speak at levels like here, and I can understand most of what they say. So it was really great for me to sort of be invited to come and lend my vision. I worked for a health plan at the time, and I think that was some of what they saw, that I could come and kind of bring that lens of sort of the larger health system. When we think about research and bench research, getting treatments from the bench to the bed to where it actually will make a difference for a patient. Obviously, we've got to go through all those other health system steps. And so I think that's really what they saw in me being able to come and kind of bring that information to the RAC. So yeah, that's really how I became more involved, first with the RAC, and then shortly thereafter I was asked to join the regular board of directors.
So, serving on any type of board, and especially the CCRF board, it requires a lot of passion, but it also requires some gifts and some skills that are more specific, some that CCRF saw in you. But you also mentioned that you felt that you maybe didn't have the expertise that some other of the board members or the research advisory committee members had. So, what strengths did you have to tap into that allowed you to be able to make an impact on the committee or on the board in the way that you.
So I think so. I will say this: one, it is, if you're going to serve on a board, you have to recognize that it does take a commitment, not only of your time, but it takes the commitment of being willing to give some of your energy as well. So making sure, one of the things I'll tell everyone, if you're interested in thinking about nonprofit service, it's incredibly important to be very passionate about that cause. You can't be halfway,
Mhm.
because you really need to be able to give of your time and your passion for the board. So I think that that really obviously was really helpful in my situation, being very passionate for the cause, having obviously some science background that really helped. I will say that having the confidence to step in and recognize, when I was in kind of my first research advisory committee meeting, I'm with all of these incredibly intelligent experts in the field talking about all these, cancer subtypes and, all of the, breaking research. And I've spent a lot of time just sort of writing things down and looking things up later. And actually that was really helpful. And I will say that that's going to always be key for everyone. Whenever you run into something that you're just not quite sure, make sure you spend the time and look things up later, educate yourselves. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I certainly did that as well. But then sort of recognizing and having the confidence to recognize your place in that role as well. I recognized somewhat early on, as they were talking about, all the different research pieces. I recognized pretty early that, it's great that we talk about research and getting all these breakthroughs, but it's even more important to think about how we get those breakthroughs to the bedside, to the actual patients. And so I recognize again that that really was why I was there.
Whether it's you or somebody else, when you get, like you said, you have to have a passion and behind the the organization that you're supporting and the board that you're on. And you give a lot to the board. But what is something that you have taken from serving on a board?
So that, yeah, terrific question. And I will say that, I mean, obviously that all the things that I take away, certainly I give of my time, give of my energy, the things that I take away. I mean, just these incredible, incredible stories of what this organization has done over 45 years. It's really interesting. A lot of the researchers that are on the RAC with me, they all got their start in cancer research because of CCRF. CCRF has been giving grants and fellowships to new researchers for decades. And so often, when there's a researcher on the research advisory committee, talking about some of the cutting edge research that's being done and the things we might want to consider giving a grant to, they talk about, hey, I got my start in children's cancer research because of a grant from CCRF. So I think, those incredible stories, I had the opportunity to visit Camp Norden this year. And for people who don't know, Camp Norden is a camp for children who have been touched by cancer. So a lot of cancer survivors, people who are maybe in a break in active treatment of cancer, they get to come to Camp Norden. And when you think about it, there are so many children. Camp is such a sort of universal experience for kids, but kids with cancer usually can't go to a traditional camp. When you think about the concern for, germs or certain activities that they might do at a camp, and a lot of the kids who are cancer survivors, they need just a little bit of extra support. And so that's one of the things Camp Norden has available. There are doctors and nurses there. It's an incredible thing to witness. And then again, the kids who are all there are all cancer, survivors. So again, these kids who attend, they're not the kid who had cancer, because everybody sort of shares those same stories. And
Mhm.
so the stories, though, again, seeing the kids at Camp Norden, hanging out together, looking out for one another, just being kids and having that camp experience, I think it's incredible. So again, these are the things I think I get 10 times more back than I've given to the organization.
And as part of SOAR Leadership Council and with Riding in the Great Cycle Challenge, we have raised a lot of funds to support Camp Norden because it's free and no cost for these kids and their families. And I know a couple of years, one year we'd raised, I think, $12,000 with the Great Cycle Challenge, and that supported a cabin full of kids, or maybe it was two. I can't remember at the time. And then we've also, as SOAR Leadership Council, had supported the emerging scientist grants, where a lot of those younger researchers, it was like a seed grant for them to then be able to prove and use this grant to then get larger grants.
And that is such a great point. A lot of people don't realize, when we think about cancer research, a lot of people are aware of, and especially now, they're aware of the NIH, the National Institutes of Health. And the National Institutes of Health really is where the bulk of research funding comes from, and that's through the federal government. But one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that in order to be eligible for an NIH grant, a researcher needs to have sort of a proof of concept already in place, because they have to apply for these grants and they have to sort of prove that they're on to a good idea before then the NIH will actually give them funds. So, exactly as you're saying, Brandy, what CCRF does and is able to do is to provide seed money so that some researcher with a great idea, but can do that sort of proof of concept and then get NIH funding. So that's actually one of the things that I think is so incredible is CCRF can say, if you give $1 to CCRF, that can then turn into, $30 in additional
Mhm.
funding through other organizations.
Yep. So a lot of the fundraising that I've done are in those buckets, but of
Uh-huh.
course, like Dream, when we're fundraising for Dream, that's a lot bigger. So SOAR Leadership Council, we were a little bit different in that aspect from probably a traditional board. But I want to ask you then, with your involvement with CCRF as a board member and I think you've been on some other boards as well, how much of the responsibility of the board lays in the fundraising aspect? Like, how much do they lean on you, I guess, to bring in other people and help with fundraising? Is that something, I guess, if people are wondering what like a fundraising component or responsibility is, what does that typically look like from your experience?
It's a great question. And I think for a lot of people, that can sometimes be a concern that kind of holds them back from serving on a nonprofit board because they're afraid, or they feel, oh, well, I don't make a lot of money. I don't have, I'm not a millionaire. I don't have, huge amounts of funds to give to a nonprofit in order to be on their board. And I will
Mhm.
say that I think that's a common misconception. It's important to kind of, go into board service and understand kind of what the board expects from you. So one of the things that I know with CCRF is CCRF doesn't expect any annual giving amount or anything like that from their board members. There are some boards that do require, a minimum giving of either actual funds or time or, something along those lines. But CCRF does not. CCRF instead really is looking for, what can you sort of provide to the board? What sort of skills or expertise do you have? So, obviously me, I have, a lot of health system experience. I've been a leader in health systems and health plans. So I sort of understand the larger kind of health system milieu. I obviously have clinical knowledge, because I'm a physician. I have, some, I guess that I've got a network of professional friends and family and such. So, certainly always thinking about a person's network. But again, a nonprofit is going to be looking for people who maybe have experience in finance, looking for people who have experience in law, in governance. They're going to be looking for people who have experience in brand management, marketing. So again, that's really what a nonprofit is going to be looking for is, what's your experience in certain areas? What sort of special skills do you have that you can help bring to that organization? And then certainly the passion for the organization. So I will say, personally, I've never really felt like, there's any significant pressure to actually, give financially. We, are occasionally in a position that we've been able to give financially to support the organization, but it's certainly not a requirement at all.
Mhm. So let's say that you are mentoring somebody or you're networking with somebody and they hear that you're on a board and they're like, I'm interested in being on a nonprofit board as well, but I don't know where to begin. But they feel called to serve. What would your advice be to someone in that position who's wondering how they can get started and what steps they need to take to find the right fit for them?
So I think, I'm going to go back to what I said before. I think number one is it's really important to be passionate about the cause. So that is, I think, the first question that someone should ask themselves about serving on a board. Are you passionate about that cause? Are you aware of the organization's mission? Are you passionate about that mission? Don't serve on a board just to serve on a board, just to, add something to your resume. You're doing it because you're passionate for the cause. Then I think the next step is, reaching out to some current board members and really asking them about sort of the role, asking them what sorts of things what's expected of you as a board member? What sorts of skills are you looking for right now in searching for board members? And then determining whether or not you can be sort of a right fit for that organization, the skill set that you have. And then, really spending some time and understanding there are some boards that'll allow you to serve on a committee first to sort of get an idea of, how much time is needed from you to serve. And that way you kind of have a better understanding of one, what the organization is doing, and then two, how much, of your time you need to give before then actually signing up to be a full board member.
Can you give a specific example through your board experience that you have been able to really like contribute X, Y, or Z, contribute something very specific that then you were able to see had an impact on the whole board or the organization based on what you contributed?
So I will say, honestly, I think the research advisory committee, this was something that had just really started when I came along and was asked to be part of it. This was something that, really hadn't been a committee of the board before. This was something that they had at the time. The organization had gone from sort of being an organization that really invested in a single academic institution to now being an organization that invests in academic institutions all across the country. And so, because of that, they felt that they needed a research advisory committee, a committee of experts who could look at different grant applications and determine, which are the ones that rise to the top as far as deserving of funds because they've got a really great idea that needs to go forward. And so that I think I will say that being part of that has been really fulfilling because being able to, along with these other incredible minds, look at some of these grants that are out there and opportunities for us to fund and to find, these incredible scientists who are kind of, have a great idea, and they just need, a little bit of a head start in order to get that idea funded so that then it can continue to build from there. I will say that has just been really, really rewarding and fulfilling to be a small piece in sort of that, I guess, the history of the organization.
Well, Abby, I have to say too that you have also really used your network though too of people like you talked about how with a board you can tap into your networks and you have done that. You've done it with Dream when Cole and I were chairing it. You were on the committee and you brought in some amazing partners so that we were able, or CCRF was able to donate a dinner. Was it two? Was one
Yeah,
or two that were
2.
sold?
Yeah,
Right.
2. Yeah,
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
that was great. Yeah.
so that also I want to bring up as an example of using your network and your resources to be able to contribute and have an impact on the overall fundraising goal for that night of the event as well. What's some advice that you have for people who may be currently sitting on a board, but they don't feel comfortable tapping into their networks yet? How do you approach that? What's the easiest way for somebody to begin doing that as well? Because it is sometimes it's like you don't want to over ask people,
Right.
right? When you're
Right.
on a board for several years. So yeah, how have you found maybe kind of like a balance of that?
Love that. So thank you. Yeah, I will tell you, I was there. When I first started with the board, I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to bother my friends, and I feel weird asking people for money. So, really, what it was is I started to tell our story, our why. I think that is really, really powerful. And again, that goes back and speaks to, why you need to be passionate about the mission of the organization. And what I learned is once I started to talk to people about Kyle and our story and why this organization is so near and dear to our hearts, all of a sudden we had all sorts of people, stepping up and saying, we'd love to help, let us know how we can help. And it's great because like, exactly as you've said, it isn't necessarily giving of money, but sometimes it can be, giving of people's talents. So we're so lucky. We have some amazing friends who are just an incredible chef and sommelier. And so they actually donated of their passion and donated actually 2 5-course dinners. So it was, yeah, it's incredible. So
Mhm.
again, that's really what I would tell people is, tell your story, tell your why, and with that, all of a sudden people are just gonna raise their hands and say, how can I help? This is an incredible cause. How can I help?
Thank you for sharing the story, Kyle's story, so that more people can be inspired by it and choose to give back to organizations like CCRF. So thank you. All right. As we wrap up here, if there is someone listening today that wants to make a difference, what is one simple first step that you would encourage them to take so that they can create a ripple effect in the same way that you have?
I would say don't be afraid to start. I think for a lot of people, they have this idea of, oh, I want to do something like this, but it's almost like they just don't get around to it, right? Life happens, other things get in the way. And so that would be one thing that I would tell people is take the time to actually get involved, if that means, going online and sending an email to someone about, I'm interested, I want to know more about your organization. I think that is really important. I feel like too many of us sort of get stuck in the, oh, I'm already so busy, I can't add one more thing. But that's what I would tell people is it really is, you have to take that first step.
And just like you took your first step when you reached out to your friend about cycling, and now look, 5 years later, you've raised how much money for the Great Cycle Challenge because you decided to get on a bike, right?
I'm a little over $10,000 this year. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
as
amazing.
that's a culmination of
Congratulations.
about 6 years of participation. So yeah.
Every little dollar helps.
Mhm.
So Well, Abby, thank you again for being on Act to Impact. And I'm really grateful for the impact that you're making through CCRF and beyond. And I know that listeners are going to feel inspired to take steps to make a difference in their communities as well.
Well, thanks for having me on, and thanks for letting me tell my story and the story again of CCRF.
You've been listening to Act to Impact with Brandy DeVries. If this show ignited your fire and inspired you to take action to make an impact, please share this episode with a friend, leave a 5-star review, or write a review to let others know how the show impacted you. I can't wait to see the action you are taking to make an impact, and I'd love for you to share that with our community. Go ahead and tag me on social media as you are out making an impact in the world. Do you have a story to share and want to be a guest on Act to Impact? I'd love to connect with you.